This is my PlayStation 2 Classic. It's a modified PlayStation 4 Pro that's running on 6.72 firmware, where I can run a custom payload which allows me to create and inject fake package files like the PlayStation 2 games that I showed off in my last video. My goal for this project was to honor my favorite system of all time, the PlayStation 2. I did this by purchasing a custom skin for my PS4 Pro from Colorware, which was modeled after the PlayStation 2, which unfortunately is no longer for sale. Using PS2 FPKG, I took my favorite PlayStation 2 ISOs and converted them into fake package files, which I could then inject on my PS4 to run as applications. I really enjoyed the freedom of this software, as it allowed me to get creative and create my own custom icons and splash screens for each of the titles. I'm leaving a link down below in case you want to download my updated pack of icons and splash screens if you're interested in doing this project. I also have to commend Jabu, the creator of PS2 FPKG, as they've now included more graphic options to automatically apply things like widescreen hacks, upscaling, custom light bar options, and custom layouts if you want to remote play using your PlayStation Vita. Playing PlayStation 2 games on my PS Vita is a dream come true. After messing around with injecting PlayStation 2 games, I thought the next logical step would be to check out injecting PlayStation 1 games. The process of creating a PlayStation 1 package is similar to the PS2, only the compatibility is much lower. I only tested out two games, Jammer Lammy and Moon, both of which did work and play, but I encountered graphical issues in both, and in the case of Jammer Lammy, it crashed after I retried a level.
Again.
What a nightmare!
The emulator isn't quite there yet, but maybe one day it will be. For now, if you want to play PlayStation 1 games on your PS4, then I just recommend doing it through RetroArch, as it has a much higher compatibility. I will admit, I'm a tad disappointed, but I still had fun designing this splash screen. I tested out one final emulator, the built-in PSP emulator that was used for games like Loco Roco Remastered and the Parappa the Rapper Remaster. You can create PSP packages by using a software called PSP Classics GUI. The creator of this software, XXX the Dark Programmer XXX, has a knack for graphic design and ease of use. It's quite simple. You just pick out your PSP ISO, and the software converts it into a fake package file, as well as creating a custom icon and splash screen for you. But where's the fun in that? Unfortunately, there's still a lot of work to be done here, as both of the games I tested failed to launch. And browsing through the PSP emulator compatibility list, there's a grand total of 2 games that are classified as playable, one of which was Half Minute Hero, which I tested myself and could not get to launch. Once further, you're better off using the PSP core in RetroArch if you want to run PSP games on your PS4. These quote-unquote native emulators are still a giant work in progress, as the PlayStation 4 homebrew scene is just in its early stages, but I don't anticipate it will stay there much longer. As of March of 2021, a new jailbreak was discovered for 7.50 to 7.55 firmwares, meaning that a lot more PlayStation 4s just became exploitable. Keep in mind that the current exploits revolve around the system's internet browser. The payload allows you to run homebrew applications and fake package files. This payload has to be activated by the user every time they restart their system, but you can just leave your PS4 in hibernate mode, which will preserve the payload and allow you to run your software. Now, a full system level exploit, aka a cold boot solution, does exist, but it is being deliberately withheld from release until the end of life for the PlayStation 4, which is now coming closer and closer due to the release of the next generation of consoles. One day, you'll be able to boot up your PlayStation 4 and it will automatically run your custom firmware, giving you all the keys to the homebrew kingdom. Speaking of homebrew, let's talk about some of the major discoveries made since my last video. I have some good news on the CBOMB front when it comes to the PlayStation 4. The CBOMB is caused when the kernel clock inside the PS4 goes out of sync, thus locking you out of your games in a hypothetical future whenever Sony's NTP servers go down and your PS4 is no longer able to communicate with them to resync the time. There is a current workaround for this problem. You can circumvent the CBOMB issue by creating a fake package file where you can dump your retail games onto a USB thumb drive, and then take the files over to your PC where you can use fake package tools to create a fake package, which you then take back over to your PS4 where you can install the fake package you just made. This pirated version of your own game is unaffected by your kernel clock, meaning that you completely own it without any CMOS batteries or Sony servers potentially locking you out of your game. There is a slight problem here. In order to get around the CBOMB, you have to run a custom payload like Goldhen in order to run the fake package files. YouTuber Modded Warfare took out the CMOS battery in their PlayStation 4 and found out that they were unable to run any retail games, meaning legally purchased games that they owned, on the disc unless they first ripped the game and created a fake package file. If the kernel clock was out of sync, or in his case, missing altogether, none of their retail copies would run, meaning that piracy is the only current workaround to the CBOMB problem on the PS4. But in the near future, there may exist one other alternative. Thankfully, Homebrew developer Al Azif is continuing work on their kernel clock software, which in the future will allow you to reset your kernel clock to the correct time, regardless if Sony's NTP servers are online. Thanks to Homebrew developers like this, our PlayStation 4s will not become e-waste. The most requested patch for a Sony game has to be Bloodborne. Fans have been clamoring for this game to receive a next-generation hardware update so that it may finally reach 60 frames per second. Given that the title is still an exclusive to the PlayStation library, the ball is entirely in Sony's court here. Or so we thought. Enter famed hacker Lance McDonald. Lance is a huge fan of the Bloodborne franchise and gave Sony every opportunity to either release their own patch for the game or a potential Bloodborne remaster, but after a long bout of silence coming from Sony's end, Lance decided to release their Bloodborne patch for free on their Patreon page, which you can download below. I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty about this one, just take my word for it. It is not an easy process, but there are a plethora of tutorials already on YouTube. Just type in how to Bloodborne 60 frames per second and I'm sure something will come up. All told, it took me about a day to figure out how to apply the 60 frames per second patch, and after all that trouble, I gotta say, it was totally worth it. There are some compromises made. Lance locked the resolution at 1280 by 720 in order to keep the frame rate the most stable. The cool part is, it doesn't matter what PlayStation you have, either regular or Pro, it runs at 60 frames and it keeps a consistent frame rate with the absolute minimal of dips. I was quite impressed. Now, visually speaking, the game looks a lot sharper and far more aliased, but I think most Bloodborne players would be willing to make this compromise for faster gameplay. Out of all the Souls-like games, Bloodborne makes the most sense to have a 60 frames option, considering that this is one of the more faster-paced entries within the From Software library, and the game stresses this faster action by having you go back into the fray to attack your enemies to recover lost health. I personally didn't notice any frame dips when I was in Central Yharnam, where they pitch you up against a lot of enemies at one time early on. What can I say? It felt like a brand new experience entirely. If you have a homebrewable PlayStation 4, I highly recommend checking out this patch. This is the Order 1886, released in February of 2015. It's a polarizing game to say the least. Most of the critics at the time noted that the game was far too cinematic and far too short. Neither of those things mattered to me all that much because I rented the game, and I've come to expect that most of Sony's mainline titles have cinematic elements to them. Anyways, the Order 1886 is one of my favorite original IPs that came out during the PlayStation 4's life cycle, and I wish it would have gotten another chance to develop the world even further because it's absolutely gorgeous. For a game that released in 2015, it still holds up wonderfully in a visual sense. The director of the game chose to cap the frame rate at 30 frames per second, finding that 24 did not look good when it came to a game environment, and setting the game at 60 frames per second would have compromised some of the visual elements. The game is also presented in a letterbox fashion, with the black bars on the top and bottom that you might be familiar with if you've played The Evil Within. The difference here being is that The Evil Within was eventually patched to allow the user to turn off the black bars, and depending on what system you were playing on, unlock the frame rate. The Order 1886 was never updated, not even for the PlayStation 5, to make these modifications. In comes Illusion, who made a custom patch to address these concerns. Illusion's patch uncaps the frame rate and removed the black bars, giving the player full view of the scenery at the expense of performance sometimes. Depending on the environment and the amount of action on the screen, the frame rate jumps between 30 and 60 frames per second, but I'm under the understanding that this is a work in progress patch and it is not fully optimized just yet. Still, I find this patch very appealing for the players out there that complained that the Order 1886 was far too cinematic. While this patch doesn't benefit the game in a cinematic sense, it truly makes the action scenes feel a bit more intense whenever it does manage to hit the 60 frames. And it would be really awesome if Sony did update this game on the PlayStation 5, where it would not have to make any compromises in graphical fidelity or frame rate as an added benefit to give players a new perspective on the game. I know this is all just wishful thinking on my end, but maybe a frame rate boost on next-gen hardware could be the spark that reinvigorates interest in this franchise.
Are you near his location?
I'm pretty slow. It may take me some time to reach him. Confirm mark on my side.
This is Final Fantasy VII Remake, and at the time of this video, it is still an exclusive to Sony's platforms. Within months of its release, it received an updated version called Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade on the PlayStation 5, boasting higher resolution, frame rate, and brand new story content. That is, if you own a PlayStation 4 copy already, with the exclusion of the PlayStation Plus edition. Okay, sounds pretty good. What's the big deal here? Well, Square did not bother to update the PlayStation 4 edition with the new content or frame rate updates. So if you still had a PlayStation 4 and had no plans of getting a 5, or maybe you didn't have the money for one, or plain just couldn't find one because of all the scalping going on, Square Enix just left you behind. So now your options are pay $500+ for an updated version of the game you already own, go without, or you could try out Illusion's awesome 60 frames per second patch on your more than capable PlayStation 4. This has got to be one of the best 60 frames per second patches I've tested out, as no matter how crazy the action got on the screen, the frame rate almost never skipped a beat. It was smooth and steady, just the way I like it. Granted, the resolution here is only at 1080p on my PlayStation 4 Pro, and there were some obvious cases of delayed texture pop-in when I was running through town. I was willing to make a few visual compromises in order to have smoother performance on my PlayStation 4, and I feel many other PlayStation 4 owners would feel the same way if Square would have afforded us this opportunity. It's not like they haven't done it in the past, because a few months after Final Fantasy 15 released on the PlayStation 4, they updated it to include two different modes for free. Light mode, which locked the resolution at 1080p but offered an uncapped frame rate, and high mode, which boosted the resolution to 1800p via checkerboard rendering, offering better textures and shadows at the expense of performance. As As Illusion's patch here proves, Square could have easily provided another mode for gamers to check out without having to upgrade their hardware to do it. As a console gamer, I'm used to having limited options when it comes to game performance, and I'm thankful that homebrew developers like Illusion here are picking up the slack of the big companies that are supposed to be looking out for their customers.
I've got you covered. Find us a way out of here.
But then...
Don't worry, I'll be fine. I've got Soldier Boy with me.
X, Soldier Boy.
They're here! Take them down! We don't have time for this shit! The clock's ticking!
Cool it. 5 seconds is all we need. Here we go. See ya. Shit.
This is Hideo Kojima's PT, which stands for Playable Teaser. It went live on the PlayStation Store in August of 2014, but was delisted from the shop on April 29th of 2015, less than a year from its launch. PT is one of the most sought-after pieces of software when it comes to the PlayStation 4. 1, because of its exclusivity, 2, because of its rarity to find a system with it installed on it, 3, because it's an incredible standalone psychological horror game loop that people to this day will not stop analyzing, and 4, because it's the last official piece of Silent Hill content before it was unceremoniously cancelled after a major fallout between Konami and Kojima, which caused Kojima to leave the company and form his own independent game studio. The best part about pirating PT is that there's no moral quandaries to get wrapped up in. It was a free demo released for a game that's never gonna come out. You're not taking any profit from anyone except for people reselling PT on eBay for up to $2,500. Just make sure you pour one out for the PT resellers out there. How are they gonna survive? If you want to play the teaser that started it all, then save your money for a low firmware PS4. This is Judgment, a spin-off of the Yakuza series. The release of this game was mired in controversy due to one of its lead actors, Pierre Taki, getting arrested for cocaine possession a few months after the game's Japanese release. Sega subsequently pulled the game from store shelves and erased all traces of Pierre's involvement, including all of his recorded dialogue and his resemblance, which was featured in the character Hamura. Pierre was replaced by voice actor Mio Tanaka, who gives a generic, gravelly, low-voiced anime thug performance, which is a tad underwhelming compared to the restrained and natural presentation that Pierre lended to the role.
俺の言ってること、わかるか？よしてくださいよ、そういうのいいんで。よかね。こういうのだよ。俺の言ってること、わかるか？よしてくださいよ、そういうのいいんで。よかね。こういうのはよ、松金組のメンツの問題なんでな。
I'm just gonna come out and say that Pierre did nothing wrong. He made good games like Work Time Fun and The Last Guy. He was just getting into character. I mean, Hamura is a career criminal. If anything, Pierre was method acting and lending some authenticity to the role. I won't stand for this. It's time to bring our boy back. Developer Kanza has got our back because they created the Pierre Taki restoration patch. I have nothing but admiration for the team behind this patch, as it preserves the original performance and intent for the character of Hamura, and restoring items like cut content, or in this case, censored content, might become more of a necessity when dealing with games released on a Sony platform.
ところがな、その殺人鬼はシャバに出てきた途端、今度は自分の恋人ぶっ殺しちまったんだよ。
マジっすか。
even though we're still in the early stages, the PlayStation 4 homebrew scene has a lot to offer. But given enough time, and a more user-friendly exploit, one day this box will turn into a beast of an emulation machine. You're gonna look back and say, wow, Hikiko was right, the PlayStation 4 is awesome. Anyways, that's about all the time I have for today's video. Be sure to check out my system video playlist where I talk more in detail about setting up my PlayStation 2 Classic project, as well as other system-related videos. Make sure to leave a like or a comment, or if you have a question, leave one of those. Maybe I might reply. And I have a link tree down below if you want to follow me on all the social medias or support the channel in any way. It really does help. Pays for all the things that I use to make these videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.